It was an unusually stormy evening in London when Sherlock Holmes received a mysterious letter, one that would set into motion a series of events that none could have predicted. The letter, sealed with a crimson wax and delivered by a courier, who seemed far too nervous to make eye contact, carried with it an ominous sense of foreboding. Holmes, always unshaken by the oddities of the world, could not deny the weight of the message. Dr. John Watson, Holmes's ever-faithful companion, sat by the fire in their Baker Street apartment, reading a journal from his days as a military doctor. The room, usually filled with the crackle of Holmes's sharp deductions and relentless thinking, was quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional sigh from Watson as he turned the page. Watson knew something was off when Holmes had not spoken a word since the letter had been opened. His friend, a man who was never short of words or insight, had become silent, his usually animated demeanor replaced by a rare stillness. Holmes read the letter in silence, his sharp eyes scanning each word with precision, as if deciphering an encrypted message. Watson, always observant but never one to push, waited for his friend to speak. It was only after several moments of deep contemplation that Holmes finally set the letter down, his face betraying none of the emotions that swirled within him. "Watson, this is a matter much darker than I anticipated," Holmes said, his voice unusually calm. "It appears I've been summoned, but not in the way one would expect. There are forces at play that even I am uncertain of. This case may very well be my last." Watson's heart skipped a beat. "Your last case, Holmes? What do you mean by that?" Holmes stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. "There is a criminal mastermind operating in the shadows, a figure far more elusive than any I've encountered before. He has been watching me. For years, Watson. He knows me better than I know myself. And now he's issued a challenge I cannot ignore. The man who sent this letter is the same person who orchestrated the events that led to the death of my brother Mycroft." Watson was stunned. He had known of Mycroft Holmes, Sherlock's older brother, a man with unparalleled intelligence and influence. But the revelation that Mycroft's death was not an accident but a deliberate act sent a wave of disbelief crashing through Watson. "You mean to say that your brother's death was no accident?" Watson asked, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Holmes's eyes flashed with a rare anger, something Watson had not seen in him for years. "No, Watson, it was no accident. Mycroft was the first casualty in a game that is far bigger than anything I could have imagined. And now, I've been pulled into it." Holmes was silent for a moment, his mind working furiously behind those sharp, calculating eyes. "This criminal is like no other. He has orchestrated a series of events that will unravel everything I've built over the years. And I must find him, Watson. I must stop him before it's too late." Watson, though concerned, knew that once Holmes had set his mind on something, there was no stopping him. "What will you do? How do we find him?" Holmes shook his head, the weight of the situation settling in. "I don't know yet, but I'll need to gather all the information I can. I'll start by going to the address mentioned in the letter, an abandoned warehouse near the docks. I suspect it is there where I will find the answers, and the final confrontation I've been avoiding." As Holmes prepared to leave, Watson couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. "Be careful, Sherlock. This feels like something more dangerous than a mere case." Holmes turned to him, his face serious but determined. "Danger is merely a perception, Watson. The truth is the only thing that matters now. I will return when I have the answers." That was the last time Watson saw Sherlock Holmes. For hours, days, and weeks he waited, hoping for his return. But Sherlock never came back. No trace of him was found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, swallowed by the shadows of his final case. The case that had been his undoing. The days stretched into weeks, and Sherlock Holmes's disappearance became the talk of London. The great detective, once a fixture in the city's streets and a shadow in its most intricate criminal cases, had simply vanished. Not a single clue, no sign of struggle, nothing to indicate where he had gone or what had happened to him. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind a city that had relied on him more than anyone could have known. The young man introduced himself as James Holloway, the grandson of the late Victor Holloway. "I've come for answers," James said, his tone resolute. "My grandfather's death has haunted our family for years. We've never known the full truth. I've found your name in my grandfather's old journals, and I need to know what really happened to him." Sherlock stood silent for a moment, his mind racing. James had no idea that the man he was seeking answers from was the very person who had hidden the truth from the world. The guilt Sherlock felt began to gnaw at him, but he knew he couldn't lie anymore. Not to this young man, who had been born after the case had already been swept under the rug. "I've already told you everything I can," Sherlock said, his voice heavy with regret. "Your grandfather's death was a tragedy. But the truth is not what you think." James's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What's the truth?" Sherlock took a deep breath, knowing that this moment, this decision, would once again shape the course of his life. He had spent years hiding the truth, but it was clear to him now that he couldn't keep it locked away forever. Your grandfather wasn't murdered by his wife, Clara. The case was misrepresented. I made a choice to protect her, to shield her from the consequences of a crime she didn't commit. But that lie, it has haunted me ever since." James's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "You lied?" Sherlock nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I did, and I've regretted it every day since. I couldn't bring myself to reveal the truth, to tear apart a family that had already been shattered by tragedy. But now, you deserve to know what really happened." James stood there, frozen, as the reality of the situation settled in. His family's history, his grandfather's death, had been shaped by a lie told by the very man who was supposed to protect the truth. "You've carried this secret for all these years?" he asked quietly. "I have," Sherlock said, his voice heavy with guilt. "And now I must live with the consequences." The weight of his confession hung in the air like a dark cloud. Sherlock had lied to protect a woman who had been more than just a client. She had been a person he had come to care for, in a way that he couldn't explain, and that perhaps was his greatest regret. His lie had not only altered the course of a family's history, but had forever changed the man Sherlock Holmes had become. As the conversation ended, James Holloway left Baker Street with a newfound understanding of the man he had once admired. And as for Sherlock, he was left with the sobering realization that, despite his many triumphs, the darkest secret he had ever carried was not one of a case unsolved, but of a choice made long ago that could never be undone.